Adding and subtracting fractions. You need to make sure you have a common denominator. Your LCD, the least common denominator, is really the least common multiple of all the different expressions. So we're going to start off by finding the least common multiple. So the first thing you want to do is factor each expression, list all the different factors that occur, and then if you have a choice in exponents, you always take the higher exponents. This first one here, the only thing that factors is 15 into a 3 times 5. Here, the 16 factors into a 2 to the 4th, still with the variables afterwards, and your 20 is really a 4 times 5, but 4 is really a 2 squared, so it's really a 2 squared times 5. You then want to go ahead and list all the different things that are occurring in your denominator. When you look at the bottom, you have two, or not denominators here, just expressions. You have 2's, 3's, and 5 that show up, along with an A, a B, and a C. When you look at your 2's, you could have a 2 squared or 2 to the 4th. You always got to take the higher exponent. Your 3 only shows up once, so you just leave it as is. Your 5, you have 5 to the 1st or 5 to the 1st, so you leave it as that. And then you take a look at a's. You could have an a cubed, or you could have an a squared. You always got to take the higher exponent. Then taking a look at your b's, b to the 5th or b to the 1st, you always take the highest exponent. And same thing with the c's, taking the higher exponent. And so this is what you get. And then you want to go ahead and work out the numbers in front. You get 240 a cubed, b to the 5th, c to the 6th. Same approach over here. You want to do the same thing. You want to go ahead and factor. Factor the first one, which factors down to this, pulling out your greatest common factor and then factoring what's left. Taking a look at the second one, you want to factor that. Since it's two identical parentheses, you could write it as one parenthesis all squared. So now for your least common denominator or multiple, which really what we'll be doing is using this in our denominators. You list all the different things that are occurring. You have your x here. You have an x minus 2 here, shows up in the first part and the second part. Remember, if you have a choice in exponents, you always got to take the higher one. And then you also want to list this, because that also shows up in the bottom. This ends up being our least common multiple. So let's go ahead and look at adding these fractions together without using your calculator. Once again, you want to go ahead and factor the denominator. So 9 is a 3 squared, 15 is a 3 times 5. So then to find your least common denominator, you want to list all the different things that show up, which are just 3's and 5's down here, and then take the higher exponent on your 3. Your least common denominator is a 3 squared times 5. So we need to have a 5 on the bottom. And if we multiply the 5 by, or bottom times 5 to get our common denominator, you gotta also do the top, because you can only multiply by special forms of 1, and 5 over 5 is that. Looking here, we need to get a 3 squared times 5, so we need another 3 in the bottom. And if you multiply the bottom by 3, you gotta multiply the top by 3. So then you go ahead and take a look at what's left. You have your denominator, writing it as one big fraction. Then you have your 10 plus your 12, which in this case would add together on top to give you a 22 over your common denominator. Now most of the time, if you're dealing with just numbers, you'd work out the bottom, but whenever you're dealing with the variables, you don't really need to work out the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that here. So you need to find your common denominator, so factor your denominators. So the first one factors into a 2 times 3 times b. 14 is a 2 times 7, because you always want to look at the prime factorization. So then you got to go ahead and list all the different things that are occurring. You have a 2 that shows up in the bottom, a 3 shows up in the bottom, a 7 shows up in the bottom. You also have an a showing up, and then you don't have a choice in exponents, so you got to take the exponent that's on it, which is a squared. Then you have b showing up in each one. You could take b to the 1st or b squared. Remember, it's always the higher exponent. That's your common denominator. We now need to go ahead and decide what we have to multiply the top and the bottom by to get that. Well, you'll notice this has a 7 and an a squared and another b that we don't have. So we'll need to multiply that. And if I multiply the bottom by that to get that common denominator, I got to also multiply the top by that. You'll notice over here Most of this denominator matches up here with the exception of I don't have a 3, so I'll have to multiply the bottom by 3. So therefore I got to multiply the top by 3. Now I can go ahead and write it as one fraction over my common denominator. Let's work this out. That gives me, when I multiply that together, a 35. A to the fourth, it looks to me like it should be an a cubed, so I think that's a typo there, so we'll go ahead and change that. And then we want to see if we can do any simplification. Well, do we have any common factors on the top that we could pull out? Well, 35 is only a 5 times 7. Neither one of them go into 27, so there's nothing we can do to pull out any common factors on top to see if it would drop with what's on the bottom. So there's nothing we can do there. And so then once again, this is a small typo. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. That wasn't a typo. I just forgot the squared here. So there's a squared here, a squared here. So it does end up giving you a to the fourth. Taking a look over here, you want to factor your denominators. Pull a 3 out. Here you're going to go ahead and pull out a 6, which is really a 2 times 3. Then you want to look at all the different things that are showing up down here. You have a 2 that shows up, a 3 that shows up, and your x minus 5. So what do you need to have on the top and the bottom of this first fraction to get that? You need to have another 2 on the bottom here. And if I multiply the bottom by 2, you got to multiply the top by 2. I already have that here, so I don't have to do anything different. Then I can go ahead and write it as one fraction. Then I'll have this part minus this part. Well, I can distribute through on top. I get a 2x plus 20. Then I'll have to distribute through the negative here. A minus 3x and a minus 15. Then all I have to do is combine my like terms on top. And then you should remember that since these are the same, top and bottom, but just flipped around the minus sign, I can cross them out and put a minus 1. And then all I have to do is just work with that, and I get a negative 1/6. Let's go ahead and work this out. Factor the denominators. 12 is a 4 times 3, and 4 is a 2 squared. LCD, you write down all the different things that are occurring. We have 2's. Choice in the exponent, though, would be a 2 squared. We have a 3 that shows up. We have an x that shows up. We have y's that show up, but then you got to take the higher exponent. Then you got to decide what do you have to multiply the first fraction top and bottom by to be able to get your LCD here. You need to go ahead and multiply this first one top and bottom by a y, an x, a 2, and a 3. Yes, we already had a 2 here, but 2 times 2 gives us our 2 squared we're looking for. You'll notice your second denominator already had our LCD, so we didn't have to do anything to it. So we can write it as one big fraction. We can go ahead and work out the first part, multiplying this together. Your 2 times your 3 is 6, times your other 3 is 18. Your x of the first times x squared is an x cubed, and then you'd still have your y. Here you go just plus your 5. Then you'd want to see, is there anything you can pull out of the top? 5 is a prime number, and 5 doesn't go into 18, so there's no common factors on the top and the bottom, so we'll just simplify the bottom a little bit, and we'll get 12xy squared. You cannot cross out your y's because it's not y times the whole top. You can't cross out your x's because it's not x times the whole top. You cannot cross out a 6 here because it's not a 6 times the whole top. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this last one here. Let's go ahead and write the top as one fraction and write the bottom as one fraction. Your 1 here is really 1 over 1. To write the top as one fraction, you got to have a common denominator, which is AB. So multiply the first fraction top and bottom here by b. Multiply the second fraction top and bottom by an a. So now we can have our common denominator on top of an AB. So then we'd have a 1 times B plus a 1 times A. But we also got to write the bottom here as one fraction. Your common denominator between your b and your 1 is b. So you got to multiply the second fraction top and bottom by b. So then you'd have a 1 minus your 1b on the top over your common denominator of b on the bottom. So now that we have it as a fraction divided by a fraction, we can multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So you write the first one down, take the second one, flip it upside down. Now you want to see if there's anything you can simplify. Well, you'll realize that on top you have a b times the whole top and a b times the whole bottom. So they're going to go ahead and cross out, and that's what we're doing there. And then when you look at what you have left, we have our a plus b on top, and then our a times our parentheses on the bottom. We cannot cross out our a's because on top it's an a times the whole top, and we can't cross out our b's for the same reason.